different time zone, could be morning. But welcome to our Consulting 101 seminar. I'd like to give you a little bit of background before we get started so you can understand what the seminar will be about and what we're going to be discussing the next hour or so. We tried to find a name for this, and we ended up calling it Consulting 101 because we felt it would be important to convey the idea that it's very basic. We're not going to try in today's 1 hour meeting to get into very great for the field of consulting. This will be our first effort to do a consulting webinar, and if it works out well, we may have follow-ups to this one in future times. So I'd like to set the background by just letting you know, first of all, that in the consulting business, there's no absolute right or absolute wrong to anything. Everybody has their own idea of how to do things. What I'm going to try to do in the time we have today is to share with you my own experience, things that have worked for me and things that have not worked for me. For somebody else, it may be exactly the reverse. But I'd like to share with you these things so you get a better feel for what things seem to be working and what things may not be working. First of all, my background is in electrical electronic engineering. I've been doing consulting in the field of electrical electronic engineering for the last 30 years or so. I am currently the director of a company called Engineering Update Institute, which is a company that develops and produces home study review courses for preparation for the FE and the PE exams for license registration in the USA. I am also one of the past vice presidents of IEEE USA, having done that as the vice president of member activities a few short years ago. And this year, as last year, I'm now the chairman of the AICN, which is the abbreviation for the Alliance of IEEE Consultants Networks. I had that position about 10 years ago, and I've just been recycling to doing it again about 10 years later, which is a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing that. It's a very pleasant thing to be doing. And then at the bottom of the list, you'll find that I'm also currently serving a term on the IEEE USA Board of Directors as a position called Member at Large. Now, many of you may not remember voting for me, but you must have, because this is an election held about 2 years ago, and it was open to all members of the USA IEEE. So I was elected to represent all of you on the board of directors, and I really enjoy doing that. It's a lot of fun and gives me a lot of satisfaction to serve in that capacity. So now that you know what that's about, we'll now move on to our second slide and give you an outline of what we're going to be doing today. First, we'll take some preliminary topics, talk about some of the basics, go into some introduction, background information, and then we'll get into our session. Now, I'm about to show you 4 sessions on the screen. Session number 1 is what we're doing today. This is called Consulting 101, and it's how to get started. That's going to take up our time today. If we had the time and the interest, we may do a session number 2 at a later date, and that in itself is a long session, another hour, hour and a half, to show you how to set your fees. Consultants like to use, as most engineers, like to use formulas, and in that session we go through and show you a mathematical algebraic formula for determining how to set your fees for a given assignment, and it's very interesting and it gives you something to look forward to if we do have a session number 2. Then another hour, an hour and a half, session number 3 is how to win the contract. You'll find that it's a very competitive arena in consulting. There are other consultants trying to get the same business that you're trying to get. In order to win the contract over other consultants, there are certain things you ought to become aware of, things you ought to learn, and things we're going to share with you in session number 3 on how to win the contract. And then we go on to session number 4, which would be the last session of the full seminar, which would be how to find clients. So you can see if you put these 4 together, I usually do it on an all-day Saturday 6-hour seminar. I'm going to try to do session number 1 only today and squeeze it in about an hour or so. Then if enough interest exists, we can talk with session number 2 and or number 3 and or number 4 at a later date. So this puts it all in perspective for you. And then the last thing, of course, would be our conclusion. Okay, so the introduction by way of background, and this part is important because every one of us has a different background where we're coming from as far as employment and education, and you'll find that the background makes a difference to how you this. So first thing I'm going to talk about is my educational background. Talk about the fact that I've been consulting in the areas of electronics, controls, and power. Then we'll talk about the engineering of the, I mentioned that a little bit briefly, so I'm going to go over that very quickly. My company that produces home study video courses. And then we'll talk about the next subject, seminars and consulting. I've been doing a lot of these 6-hour seminars for the IEEE and different groups and networks traveling around the country. It's been a lot of fun doing seminars and consulting. It's a full 6-hour, all-day Saturday seminar. And something I've been doing a lot of lately because of the way the economy is, we're doing a lot of startups on consulting networks. I like to do seminars where we start up a network or re-energize an existing network that may need a little bit of a encouragement to help us going back on this path to success. Next page shows very quickly my own educational background. We go there very quickly. You don't need to know too much more besides the fact that I've done these things, and you have your similar background, I'm sure. And now we talk about the fact that I, at one time, thought I really wanted to be a university professor, and I did it. I enjoyed it. I'd love to do it again. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I've taught at the University of Florida. I've been a professor at Marquette University, UCLA, Northern Illinois University, and more recently at Illinois Institute of Technology. And I love teaching. I think it's a very wonderful profession to be able to teach engineers. But I've also enjoyed industry tremendously. And I've worked as an employee, a regular employee, not as a consultant, as an employee. I've worked for 5 different companies over the years that I've enjoyed working for. I can say nothing bad about any of them. And one reason you don't do that is because, guess what? Those employees, those employers, very often become good consulting clients. And then on the last line, I mentioned the fact that there are over 30 different client companies that I've been working with. So I'd like to, I won't go into details of who those are because that's not important for today. And by the way, while I'm here, let me just share something with you that's very important. When you do consulting work for a company, you are really not allowed to discuss that or mention that, even in a resume, unless you get the permission from that company first to do it, because it could be a very sensitive issue, depending upon the company and what you do. For instance, if you're a specialist, say like on a certain area, and a company has hired you, and somebody else becomes aware of that, they will assume that the company that you're working for has a problem in that area or is doing something in that area. And so the fact that you were consulting with that company, it gives an implication that that company is doing something or had a problem. And so I've made it a point, every time I part company with a client, I ask, do I have your permission to mention the fact that I've done consulting work for you? And I found that almost 95% of the time the answer is yes, but it's very comfortable because it means that they'll look at you again with a lot of ethical respect, and they'll hire you again. Okay, now we can get into a little bit of a quiz. We have a question coming up here. It's a multiple choice, and you can just think about the answer and what you would like to do. Oh, by the way, incidentally, I should mention to those of you who may have just come on, don't forget to mute your phone so it doesn't interrupt the flow of the audio information here. Okay, back to the quiz. Who or what is a consultant? And here's your multiple choice. Is it A, someone who is retired or unemployed? I mean, I run into people all the time, and I say, what are you doing nowadays? They say, oh, I'm consulting. Well, really? Well, who are you consulting with? Well, really, I'm just kind of looking around, or I'm retired or semi-retired, or I don't really have a job right now. And that is something you often hear about who or what is a consultant. Secondly, it could be somebody who works for a consulting company. For instance, it might be a company like ABC consulting corporation, and you are an employee for them. You work on a salary to that company, but that company is a consulting company. Does that make you a consultant? All right, let's go on before we answer the question. Part C, is it someone who works through an agency? Someone who finds business, the agency finds a business client for you, and then you work on salary to the agency. So the company or the client pays money to the agency keeps a part of it, then they pass one on to you as the employee of the company. Is that person a consultant? Or D, is it somebody who works independently, somebody who finds business clients for themselves and who provides services directly to the client, and there's no agency in between or no middleman or middle person? Well, the answer is all of these seem to work quite well. I like to focus more, though, on number D because that's the one that I like best, the one I like to do. And so as I make my comments today, I want you to picture it more coming from definition number D, because most of the work I've been doing over the years involves finding business clients for myself and providing services directly to the client. Okay, we're going to move on now. The current consulting climate, 2009. We find that the economy has had a major impact on our consulting business. There's been a lot of outsourcing going on. There's been a lot of downsizing, a lot of layoffs. We're seeing a lot of those. There's also, in addition to that, a lot of re-engineering. I may not be seeing too much, but it's becoming much more common than it was in previous years. We're seeing some forced early retirements, and we're also seeing that these situations create needs and opportunities. I'll give you an example, and this is not universally true, but it works quite often. A company decides they want to lay off a certain high-priced engineering person they have, and so they laid them off, and then discover 2 or 3 weeks later that they wish they hadn't. Well, to go back and call that person to come back in would be, there's a pride factor involved. You don't want to go and tell that person, oh, we made a mistake, so we need to have you come back and work for us. So the company finds it's easier, and it can save them face, if they were to hire a consultant on a temporary basis. It's a lot cheaper for them because, as you probably know, if you work as an employee, a lot of money is spent on the overhead and the fringe benefits, which you do not have to give to the consultant. So even though it's not a consultant is being paid a lot of money, in most cases, what it's cost to hire a consultant is even less than trying to hire somebody to fill that position. But because of the layoffs and because of some of the other problems or retirements, there's a lot of increasing need for more and more consultants. So let me go on now and talk about some of the myths. Some are true, some are false, about consulting. And you'll find that when we go through this list, there are about a dozen or so items here. We'll do each one very quickly and just try to give you a feel for what the consulting arena is like in the year 2009. The first thing that appears top of the list, for no good reason, these are just random order, is email. People seem to think that if you sit at home and watch your computer screen and watch your email, business will come to you. And that is not true. Most of the business is made by person-to-person, one-on-one contact, which we'll talk about a little bit, and we talk about a lot when we get to session number 4, which we won't get today. But that's a lot of it, is relying upon email. Email is good. There's nothing wrong with it. But I also want to suggest to you this, that if you plan to be in the consulting business and be communicating with clients by email, it is good to have an email address that would command some respect. And, for instance, when they see an address like Hotmail or a Yahoo address, the client knows that that's a free thing you're doing. And there's very nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of projecting an image of business. It's nice if you had your own domain, and so you can have your own email address. It's not a requirement, but it's one of those things that can make a small difference between you and somebody else if competition arose. So I recommend that if you can afford it, and if you'd like to do it, get yourself your own domain name so you can have your own unique email address. This ties into the second topic of a website. In this day and age, 10, 15 years ago, this was not necessary. But today, it's really vital to have your own website that addresses the things you're going to be working on. Nothing too elaborate, something that just basically gets the interest of the client who would want to look you up. A little bit later in our discussion today, we'll talk about the IEEE USA website, which we can all participate in, and how valuable it is to the engineering consultant. Then there's the issue of also a telephone. In today's society, you need to have a cell phone that would ring every place the person tries to reach you. So I think it's important that you have a good telephone service with answering available. The next item on the myth list, interesting assignments. You know, when I first started to do consulting, I was driven into it because of the fact that many of the assignments I was working on were not too terribly challenging. I found after a few weeks, a few months, things got a little bit boring, and some people have a long span of being interested. Some people have a shorter one. But I found that I needed to find something that's more challenging, more difficult, and would really, challenge my my engineering abilities. And so for that reason, I chose to do consulting work. However, I have to admit that many of the assignments, not a lot, but just a few of them, are not as interesting as the others. And why do you do it? Well, sometimes you have nothing else to do. So that's what you do. But at times when you have 2 or 3 things going in parallel, then you can choose the more interesting one that you like to work on. The next thing on the list is, it says challenging assignments. Well, that ties into the previous subject. Some of the assignments are very challenging. They really put you to work and give you some hard things to solve, and some of them aren't quite as challenging. So many assignments that consultants undertake may not be as challenging. Then we come to the next subject of money. People say, oh, engineers, consultants, oh, they make a lot of money. And the answer is, well, it's a true and false, and I'll tell you why. Engineers in consulting are very well paid by the hour or by the week for what they're doing. Now, if you work 52 weeks a year at typical consultant rates, and you do that year after year, working yourself at a 100% duty cycle, the answer is yes, you'll make a lot of money. You may be a little bit burnt out working so much, but that sort of sets up the next part of discussion. Because if you choose to work maybe 70% of the year and take a few weeks off in the summer, maybe in the winter, or various reasons, when you're not working, you make zero, and you have to accept that. But while you're working, you make pretty good money. So if you average it out, you may find you aren't making a lot of money, but maybe you have a little more time on your hands to do things you're interested in doing. So the answer to that part is, do consultants make a lot of money? It depends. You work a lot and real hard? Yes, you will. If you decide to take a lot of time off, do some other things, you'll make a little bit less. The next thing on our list is, it says 2 hours. You only have to work a few hours. Well, that ties into the previous subject also. If you can be working just a few hours, and keep in mind you're usually paid by the hour, you obviously will make less money. Most companies, when they hire a consultant, they're looking for somebody who's going to spend a lot of time, be very dedicated, maybe for a short term, maybe not for months or years, but at least for a few weeks, where you can be working 40 or even plus hours. Sometimes you may use someone to work at home also. So the hours could be debatable and pretty much individual choice. The next subject is politics and management. You get to politics when you're working as a consultant? The answer is yes. I wish I could say no, but the answer is yes, because one of the things I tried to get away from in industry was some of the politics that occurs in major corporations. And I thought by being a consultant I could avoid that. Well, in a way you do, because it doesn't affect you directly. The truth is that many consultants are hired by managers to make a point. So they can say, my consultant did this and my consultant proved this. And what they're really doing is getting into political battle with their own management. And you become a tool in the politics. So you become a tool, but you're not really part of it if you were, say, an employee for the company. So when you become a consultant, you have to accept the fact there will be a certain amount of politics involved, but you have to look from a different point of view. You're not directly involved as an employee, but you're being by management to prove a point for somebody. This item is a boss. We don't have a boss. Well, the answer is yes and no. You do not have a boss because as an independent consultant, you can come and go as you please, take time off and so forth, and you're totally in charge of your life. However, when you are on the job working for a company as a consultant, there's somebody there that's going to be giving you some direction or asking you a lot of questions, asking you to do certain things. That person, you can call them a boss. I like to call them a client because the bottom line is I'm not working with that person as an employee. I'm really more of a counselor or advisor to that person. And yes, they may have the ability to terminate our agreement. That's always possible. But at the same time, they're not really your true boss. The next item is self-employed. I like being self-employed for obvious reasons because you're working for yourself. But there are also a lot of things that are very attractive about being self-employed. In addition to the obvious things like being a master of your own time and so forth, we have the next subject that ties in with that, which is on tax benefits. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about taxes here and a little bit later, not in great depth, because I am not a tax expert. I'm not going to give tax advice. What I'm going to do is share with you things that have worked for me, and they're all legal, ethical, and moral, and I can give you some ideas along those lines. But you may need to talk to somebody who's really an expert to get some more detail on that. Yes, there's some very good tax benefits, things I was not really aware of when I first entered consulting, and it gives you a way to write off a lot of your income that you earn from consulting fees, that you can write them off because of the situation you're in. The next thing is work at home. Work at home is something that is negotiable, depending on what you're doing. If a company hires you to go off and don't come back for another 3 weeks or a month and solve a certain problem, and you can go home and work on that. There's nothing wrong with that. However, a lot of companies would like to have you present during the normal work hours because they'd like to have you interfacing with their employees. They want their employees to benefit from your presence, to learn from you. Hopefully, what they're trying to do, and they don't say this very explicitly, they're hoping they can learn enough from what you're teaching them that they won't need you anymore. But nevertheless, some assignments you can work at home, and some are things that you have to be present. This all depends on how you negotiate your contract with the client. Then the last one on the list there is a magician. I have to include that because this is something I think works very well. You know, people, when they hear the word consultant, or bringing in a consultant, or hiring a consultant, they imagine somebody who is going to come in and solve all the problems. And you have to be aware of the fact that the expectations are quite high. And they're so high that sometimes there are unreasonable expectations of what you can do. And when that happens, you just have to accept that and work with it. I've gone to work for companies where within the first day or two, they expected me to solve a problem that they had been having trouble with for 6 months or 9 months. And I cannot do that. But on the other hand, they hire you because they have high expectations of you. And I find that usually a new person coming into a situation where you had some difficulty, that would bring some novelty and some fresh thinking. And I think that's where you really play a very important role with a company. I've had companies that hire me as a consultant, and they say, we have a problem, and we don't know how to solve it. And I say, well, let's talk about it. And so we spend 2 or 3 days talking about it, and basically I say nothing much except listen, a lot of polite, and at the end of the 2 or 3 days, they say, wow, that really helped. Now we know they solved the problem. Credit for solving it, which I accept. But in all honesty, in many cases, they solved their own problem. It puts us in the role of being more like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, where we just listen and smile politely and answer the right questions. But part of being a consultant is something a little bit more than just going in and rolling up your sleeves. And there's a certain amount of diplomacy involved in working as a successful consultant. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Now, when I talk about becoming a consultant, you have to have a excuse me. You have to have a reason for doing that. And I find that the reason is probably the most important item that I can talk about today. And I will have to share with you my own experience as to why I chose to become a consultant and why it works. And for some people, why it may not work. Many years ago, I was working as an employee for a very good company. I was an employee, notice, not a consultant. This is before I became a consultant. And this was an excellent company. They had wonderful management. They had good benefits. I was very proud to be part of this good company. But the day came that I was a little bit expecting. I had gotten involved with an area. Some of you may appreciate this. If you do, fine. If you don't, just accept it. I had become an expert in something called Kalman filtering, which had to do with navigation systems and navigation equations. I enjoyed doing that. And there weren't many people in the company that enjoyed doing what I was doing. So what happened was the company had accepted a contract, a German Air Force, the German Air Force, or a company in Germany, to work on this navigation system. And saying, well, Gary, you're going to have to go overseas to work with these clients. And I said, I really don't want to, because at that time, I was like many other people. I had a young family, and as a matter of fact, I just had a baby girl, and she was just a few weeks old. And they said you have to go to Germany and probably come back in about 6 or 9 months. Well, I thought if I come back in 6 or 9 months, she'll be 6 or 9 months old, and I would have almost 100% of her life. And I don't want to do that. So I said, I really don't want to go. I got to the point where they said, if you go, all is well, but if you don't go, we're going to have to terminate our employment. So they said, we'll give you 30 days to think it over. Well, those are the 30 days that I chose to start building a consulting business. I did not do it on their time or on their telephone. I did it on my own. But the thing is, I was so determined, I was so passionate about this, that it had to happen. I knew I'd be burning my bridges behind me in about a month. I had the usual things, a mortgage payment or mortgage payments to make, cars I was purchasing, 4 children that I was taking care of, my wife and 4 children. And so I was willing to cut off that weekly check in about a month from now and realize that I'll have to have income flowing right after that. It sounds very risky, and it is. I don't necessarily say you should all do the same thing, but I'm trying to tell you it can be done if you have a strong reason and you're very passionate. If you're a more casual person and say, well, maybe someday I'll go into consulting, usually it doesn't happen. Or if it happens at a very small scale. You have to approach this with intensity. And so I'd like to plant the seed that you have to have a real burning reason. You have to realize that if you don't get this thing done in the next month or next 2 months, you're going to be in trouble. You got to put yourself in a tight spot, and that really motivates you to work harder. So why do you want to become a consultant? Is it because of the challenge of consulting assignments? That could be one reason. Could it be the satisfaction you get from working on a project, seeing it to completion and getting the satisfaction out of that? That could be a good reason. Is it a variety? That when you work on several different projects, you enjoy the change of things to work on? That could be a reason. Is it the independence, knowing that you can set your own vacations and your own travel time and do whatever you want to do? And by the way, I am not eating right now. If anybody else is eating, we can hear you. We'd like to share with you, but if you are, just, put it on star 6 so we don't have to listen to the eating. Moving along, and somebody's got a dog out there too, and the dog is participating. And, of course, the independence. We're talking about the independence of being a consultant. And, of course, the income could be a reason, like that motivates you to become a consultant. And then, finally, for many people, it could be the way to provide income while changing areas of interest. I've had a good friend of mine who was an manufacturing engineer. He had a very good job, but he decided he really wanted to be into banking. He wanted to get out of engineering and become a banker. But he thought he just didn't, overnight say, I'll quit my engineering job today and become a banker on Monday morning. He needed time to go to school and learn whatever he had to learn about banking. So he said, for next year or next 2 years, I will do consulting work to tide me over until I can get started in banking. So for him, it was a reason. It provided income while changing areas of interest or changing a career. So what are the considerations that are necessary to get started? How do you find your wife? Okay. On the next slide, we're looking about some of the details about getting started. And I'd like to preface all this by saying, as we go through some of these details, some of which you may already have understood, some of you maybe already know these, I want to just get to the bottom line. If you look at the bottom line I have there, you'll find the word clients in there. Unless you have clients, the other things above or in parallel mean nothing. So you really ought to be thinking about the most important thing about getting started is getting a client. And I'm going to help you with that as we proceed through our discussion. Many people say to me, I got to rent office space someplace. I got to find a building where I can rent office and have a place of business. And I would say that is not necessary. For some people, it might be an excuse to put things off for a while. You don't need to have an office any place except you have a desk at home, and you can do some work at home, and you can go to an employer's place and work with them. It's nice. It's nice to have an office, but not necessary. Do you need to advertise? And the answer is yes and no. Let me explain. I do not like to send out lots and lots of resumes. I have found it's a waste of time, it's a waste of postage, and it doesn't do anything for you. I do not like to make cold telephone calls where I call somebody up and try to get hired by just being on the phone and hoping I can get lucky. I don't like it. I'm very uncomfortable doing something like that. So not liking to mail out resumes, not liking to call people, what do you do? Well, one thing you could do is do some advertising. Where would you advertise? There are a lot of places. You have to know your own community and know your own technology. What are you working with? What areas are you trying to do consulting work in? That will influence what kind of publications you try to advertise in. Now, advertising costs money. And very often, in order to save on advertising, you may find that you can advertise without actually running an ad by writing an article or publishing an article in a magazine of something of interest to you. For instance, if you're working, say, like with wind energy and wind farms, you might find a publication where you can write an article about wind energy or wind farms. Of course, at the bottom, you sign your name, and you say consultant. And very often, that would be just as good as running an ad someplace. And it doesn't have to be a very complicated article. It could be just something that would be very basic and very fundamental. And this would be one way of advertising without having to worry about a big advertising budget. Another thing that comes up is security clearance. You need security clearance, and for most of the time, the answer is no. There are some governmental agencies in the United States that you need to do some work for. They may require clearances. When that happens, you can take each one on an individual basis. I have found that most of the work that I've been doing, I can do without security clearance. Most places require, I shouldn't say most, but many places require U.S. citizenship. Not so many require security clearance. We already talked a little bit about the telephone part, the fact that the telephone is an instrument that people will be calling you, you'll be calling them, and so you have to develop some good telephone manners, some soft skills that we probably don't learn too many of in engineering school, but that's something we could talk about at another time. But it's very important to have a telephone that rings. When people call, they want to get an answer right away. They don't really want to be put off. They don't care for voicemail, even though voicemail is better than nothing at all. But they don't want to have the phone ring and nobody answers. Usually, they like to get instant response. The next thing I have here is fictitious name. I have many friends who have chosen to be in consulting, and they have chosen a fictitious name for their business. call it XYZ Consulting Firm or XYZ Associates or something like that. And I personally have never done that. I'm not saying it's bad or I'm saying it's good. I'm just saying from my own experience, I just use my own name in my consulting endeavors, and I think it's a good way to have people remember who you are. And but if you choose to go to a fictitious name, I would not discourage that. Then you ought to be concerned about taxes. What do I need to do about taxes? What kind of things should I be planning on? Well, when you get into the subject of taxes, you'll find that there are a lot of write-offs available. These are all ethical, legal, and moral, and they involve such things as writing off part of the square footage of your house that you use for your business. The office square footage you have can provide a way to write off part of your mortgage payments, part of your utility bills, and so it's something that you should look into, because it's a very important way to protect some of the income that you receive. Okay, we got a note that somebody was eating a little while ago. I think they'll stop by now. Okay, great. All right. What about a business card? Well, with today's technology on computers, you and I can make a business card virtually overnight, and with a nice printer, you can get color and so forth. It's an absolute necessity to have a business card. You may want to change it depending on where you're going and who you're talking to, but the basic information must be there. Your name, your telephone number, your email address, your website if you have one. And these are things that are vital to being in business, and virtually every place you go and you talk to people in the engineering business or anything that's related to that, you should always be sure that they know how to reach you again. So I suggest having a business card wherever you go, and you want to have 2 or 3 different cards in your pocket with different things depending on what kind of a situation that you may encounter. What about registration and licensing? Well, depending upon the state in which you live, things can be very awkward sometimes. I know of some states where you cannot call yourself an engineer or be involved in engineering unless you are registered in that state as a professional engineer. And many states do not have that requirement. But also, there are ways to get around that, which are, your best person to advise you on that will be to contact your state board. Every state has a state board for licensing and registration. And it's best to be upfront and call them and say, hey, I have my license or I do not have my license. Here's what I want to do. What do you recommend I do? And in many cases, they'll advise you to try to get your license, which you have to take a couple of exams to get there. But also, they don't come down real hard on you and say, if you don't do it by Monday morning, you're out of business. They tend to be a little bit more generous and say, look, why don't you go after the PE registration, and if you get done in the next year or two, no problem. You can call yourself an engineer or a consulting engineer. And there are a lot of things involved in that subject, but I don't want to go into all of them today. I just want to let you know that having a license is highly recommended, but it's not really required, depending on what kind of engineering you're doing. People ask, well, do you need that if you're in software or if you're in hardware or whatever? That question is up for grabs. It all depends upon what you're doing and what kind of clients you're working with and what the rules are in the state in which you are working. The next subject, the next column, is a very important subject, liability insurance. When you become an independent practitioner, as we're talking about here today, you are subject to possible lawsuits depending upon the kind of work you're doing. And to protect yourself, you should go out and buy some liability insurance, which is not very expensive. But if you do, be sure you have adequate coverage. Usually the agent you would talk to can help you. I got to do a little commercial plug at this time because I personally found that the best liability insurance I could find any place was through the IEEE. The IEEE provides liability insurance availability to their members, and there are good rates. Lloyd's of London is the company they deal with, which is the #1 name in liability insurance around the world, and the rates are very favorable for IEEE members who apply for liability insurance. So I think you'll find on the IEEE website under benefits someplace you can find that kind of information. What about stationery? Do you need to have special stationery? And that comes under the same heading as the business cards, because it's nice to have a heading which you and I can put together very quickly using our computers and a good quality printer. You can create stationery which has your name, address, telephone number, and so forth. You even want to change that from time to time, depending on who you're writing to. And it looks very nice to do a lot of things with stationery. Now, at this point, I'm just going to make a little bit of a detour on the stationery subject to tell you something that I think you may find very, very helpful in finding clients. You know, in this day of electronic communication, where we do so much with email, we're very often tempted to write letters to clients and to correspond with them by way of mail. It's so convenient, and of course the price is right. However, there's something very special about a piece of paper on which you write something and you sign your name with a regular pen and you put it in the mail, and yes, it takes 2 or 3 days to get where it's going. But clients seem to like the idea of somebody who they can almost feel person because of your correspondence. I have gotten a lot of clients who have said to me, we like the fact that you wrote us a letter. We like that personal one-page letter that you sent us, a little bit of descriptive material, and you sign your name to it. That carries a little extra special weight. So I'm not doing this to be competing with any other method. I'm just saying that sometimes we tend to get too carried away with doing things electronically, and the old-fashioned personal touch still has a lot of salesmanship in it. What about brochures and resumes? Yes, you need to have a brochure and a resume, but not for mailing out blindly to companies hoping somebody's going to find you. You need to have brochures or resumes and be flexible to be able to make changes almost overnight in your resume to match the given situation. I find a resume comes in best after you've talked to a client and they say, you know, it sounds like you may be able to help me. Can you send me your resume? Well, if that client is looking for help, say, in motor control, on my resume, I will highlight my motor control background, whereas the person I speak to the next day may say, we want to hear more about your DSP, digital signal processing background, and I will emphasize that in that case. So my resume is a variable resume. It changes almost on a day-to-day basis, depending on the brochure, depending upon who I talk to. But I keep it handy in the telephone, in the computer, ready to be changed and to adapt it or to adopt it to whatever the clients are looking for. Do you need a computer? Well, I think that goes without saying. Yes, if you asked me this question 20 years ago, I'd say, not sure you need it. A calculator would be fine, or a slide rule would be fine. But today, slide rules no longer acceptable. A calculator is not the way to go. You got to have a computer to do all the things, not just for doing computational work, but doing all the correspondence and surfing on the internet and doing webinars and seminars and things of that nature. So absolutely, you got to have a good computer. You could have a desktop, which most of us have, and also have a laptop, because with a laptop, when you start traveling, it's like nothing has changed. When I go on a trip someplace, I take my laptop with me. I can do everything I could have done at home. Yes, there are certain files on the desktop I don't have access to, but nevertheless, it's important to have at least a desktop. I recommend having a desktop and a laptop if you can manage that. Email, we already talked about that, so I wouldn't go into too much more detail about the email part of it. Also, we've already talked a little bit about websites. Oh, by the way, let me mention that errors and omissions insurance is also included in the same place where you would apply for liability insurance through the IEEE. It all comes under the same heading, and so if you're looking for errors and omissions, you can also get that through IEEE USA. Do you need to be licensed in every state? And the answer is no. And the reason is that if you are licensed, say, in the state of New York as a professional engineer, and if you're going to be working in another state, say California, you can easily have California recognize, the states all reciprocate with very little exception, they reciprocate. So California would gladly have you, you'd be recognized there as a PE, or you could even have your PE license be issued by the state of California if you so choose. There are very few states that do not reciprocate. One comes to mind would not affect audience too much, but it applies in the field of civil engineering. I've had friends of mine who are civil engineers in an eastern state, and when they go to practice consulting in the state of California, California requires that they take additional exams on seismic engineering because of all the earthquakes in California. So that's the only exception I can think of where what you are licensed for in one state would not apply in a second state. So most of the states are very good in doing that. Okay, back on track. The next item I have on the list on page number 5 here is incorporating. Do you need to incorporate? And the answer is individual choice. I have never done it. I have no regrets. There are certain things about incorporating that are good. There are certain things that are very attractive about it. There are certain things that are not as quite as attractive. I'm not an expert. I'm not an attorney. But I think you have to make your own path on that. I would say half the engineers I know, half the consultants I know have not incorporated, and then, of course, the other half have done so. So it's a sort of a 50-50 proposition. So it's up to you if you choose to incorporate or not incorporate. Then finally we come to the subject of clients. Where do you find clients? Well, you know, this is probably the key question that all consultants are looking for. After all, until we find a client, we have nothing. So to find clients is a bit of a challenge, and one of the reasons that it becomes a challenge is because we're all used to thinking the way that we've been raised, the way that we've been educated. The way you approach a job, like the way you would approach a regular employer-employee relationship, different from the way you approach consulting. You'd look in a newspaper for an ad for an engineer, or look in a magazine, or you'd have somebody help you find one. But the problem with consulting is that the clients and the consultants are passing each other like strangers in the night, like ships in the night. We don't even see each other. And very often we're in the same room looking for each other and we can't find each other. And so what's really important with the clients is to become aware of methods that can be used in order to find clients and without going through the things we talked about before. So I'll just leave that subject by saying it's the most important subject. I think it's important to have clients. I did. When I gave when the company gave me 30 days, I just happened to be, was on a Friday, and I went home on Friday night to ponder what to do, to keep the job or to say goodbye and move on to become a consultant. Because like many of you, I've often dreamt of being a consultant, but never quite had the courage or determination to make the move. But now I was getting close to that point because I did not want to go away and leave my family behind. So when I went home on Friday night, I saw an ad in the paper. I was living in the Los Angeles area at the time, and the ad was for a consulting seminar being held the next day in Los Angeles, close to the Los Angeles airport. And I looked at it and I thought, this is luck, maybe, or just coincidence, that I'd be coming home thinking about consulting, open the paper and see this ad for a consulting seminar the next day in Los Angeles. I went to it. It cost me $99. It was an all-day consulting seminar, and it was run by a very, very, very good instructor. The gentleman is one of my idols of all time. Unfortunately, he passed away a few short years ago, and his name is Howard Shenson, S-H-E-N-S-O-N. Howard Shenson was a professor, business professor at Cal State University in Northridge, California. And he ran one of the greatest seminars I can never forget, and I learned so much from what he taught. And then I have to tell you what else I did, because you might think this is being unfair. But when the seminar was over at 4 o'clock and people were packing up to go home, I walked up to him and I said, Dr. Shenson, can I buy you dinner tonight? And he seemed a little bit surprised that I would ask that. But he said yes. And the seminar continued, because when he and I sat one-to-one across the table and started to talk, we got into some of the things that he had not been able to share with a larger group. And he started telling me about ways I can find clients and things I ought to be doing. So pretty much mapped out my next 30 days for me so I can know what to do after hours, on weekends, because I have to keep the job going that I was working on. And so at the end of 30 days, when I walked into my manager's office with my resignation in my hand, I had 4 clients already waiting for me with work I had to do. And so it made it possible to make a clean break from industry, as I call it, the regular professional jobs, into consulting, and it set the stage for spending the rest of my career doing that. So clients are very important. You really need to have clients lined up before you can make that change, and there are many ways. Unfortunately, today we don't have time to go into all that. That would be session number 4. We're doing the full-length seminar. So let me go on now to number 6 and talk about the tax advantages, something that's already touched on. I'd like to go through this list very quickly and talk about the, first of all, when I travel as a consultant, my automobile travel, the cost of traveling, the gasoline, whatever it is, the cost of traveling can be written off as a tax deduction. The best thing to do is to keep a good record of it. I like to keep a little book in my glove compartment, and nothing very formal, doesn't have any particular format. It's just a notebook that says, I traveled to client on a certain date and time. I drove 25 miles or 50 miles and back home. I just keep a record of these things so that when it comes time to file income taxes, the information will be there and available. IRS likes that very much. You have a business income. Most of it will come on a Form 1099. Your client sends you a 1099 at the end of the year, or maybe even earlier than that, and it shows your income. They also notify the IRS, and that's what you're going to base your income on for your tax purposes. I have found that when I became a consultant, I had to learn some new schedules to work with. The Schedule C, 1040, Schedule C. I had to learn about the SE, that's a self-employment form, and a couple others that are really not important at this point. But you need to approach this in a very simple business point of view. There's nothing to hold you back. It's all legal, and you can read a lot of this in many of the IRS documents. Business gifts. If you give people a gift, and as a business gift, it's also a tax deduction. I haven't done much of that, but I know friends of mine hand out calendars and notebooks, which is good publicity, and they can write off those expenses at the end of the year. If you are having dinner with a client and you pay for the dinner, business meals are also tax deductible. If you give out demos, you give out samples or anything to promote your business, that also is a legitimate tax deduction. If you have equipment like a computer, if you buy a computer and you want to depreciate it over a period of, say, 3 or 4 years, or whatever you choose, you can write off a portion of that every year if you can show that it's dedicated to your engineering business, or at least part of it is. You'd have to work it out also with the IRS. But you can depreciate your car, depreciate your computer. And then if you get into home entertainment, I've never done much of that, but I know some of my fellow consultants who have parties, and they invite clients to parties, and if that's part of promoting your business, it makes it a legitimate tax deduction. Office in the home, we already touched on that. If you have a section in your home that you use for your business exclusively, if you don't, you're going to have to do a little bit of prorating. But you can use the square footage and deduct some of your expenses for running your office. Sometimes you have to have inventory. One of my friends who does a lot of circuit building, he has to buy chips, and he buys a lot of electronics equipment, oscilloscopes, and so forth. And a lot of that are tools that are required as part of the business, and you can write that off legally. Record keeping, don't get carried away by getting too scared of record keeping. I have found that you keep it very simple. Just keep like a diary. Just write numbers down, write dates down. That's the best thing to do. And if you can find something more structured than that, you like to work with Excel spreadsheets or things like that, you may find it very effective. Then, of course, your telephone expenses would also be tax deduction if you use your telephone in a line of business. Okay, well, we have one more slide I want to get to here. as we come to our conclusion, we want to let you know that we have some websites that you may want to spend some time looking at. Let me show them here, and you can copy these later, depending on your interest. Let me start with the second one, the one in the middle of the slide here, the Start a Local Consultants Network. You can contact me or you can contact IEEE USA. We have been starting consultants networks all over the country and outside the USA at quite a rapid rate. We now have about 50 consultants networks, 43 are in the USA, 7 are overseas, and they're growing rapidly, I think because of the way the economy is going around the world. You'll find information on how to start a local consultants network, the web address given there. The IEEE will help you. IEEE USA will assist you in doing that. Then if you look at the third item here, how to form an affinity group, this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but once a network becomes a network, and you only need 3 or 4 members to get it started, you can apply for what they call affinity group status, the IEEE, and IEEE USA, actually it's IEEE. And when you do that, your group will turn out to be a very desirable thing, not only from your point of view, but from your section and your region's point of view, because they like to have affinity groups as part of a region or part of a section for many reasons, prestige and money. And then, of course, the one on the top is what I was talking to you about earlier. I've been doing, going around the country, starting up consulting networks and expanding ones that are already there and having fun doing that. You can find information about that at the website shown there. Okay, now I will spend the last few minutes we have available. If you would like to ask some questions, I'll try to answer as many as I can. So if we go ahead and get started, let's see, somebody here, we're seeing them now in the chat room. Don't forget, if you're not asking a question, be sure to mute your phone. And on the other hand, let's see what kind of questions we have here. Okay, let me take one that, let's see, this one says, okay. Trying to find the right question here. Let's see, the one in red? Okay. One person says here, it's kind of jumping around here on my screen. All right. It says, 1099 work in many states or cities. Do you need to be licensed in each place? And the answer, I think we already said, no, you don't need to be. But you could get your license sort of reflected. As an independent, do you have to pay unemployment or Social Security taxes? You do not have to pay unemployment to yourself. If you hired employees and you had a company, that's a different story. So as an independent, self-employed person, no, you don't. But you have to pay Social Security taxes, and you have to pay, and it's all worked out very well for you on the 1040. They show you towards the bottom of your first page of your 1040, and also on your 1040 Schedule C and Schedule SE. You can download this from the IRS website, and it's very, very simple. Yes, but you have to pay some Social Security because of that. Okay, what else do I have here in the way of a question? Most engineers don't consult because of liability risk. I think a lot of engineers do consult in spite of the liability risk. Sometimes we can become a little bit too conservative or a little bit too afraid. Depends on what you're doing. Don't think of this as being something that's as a high-risk business. If you're building bridges that people can be driving over with an automobile and the bridge may collapse, yes, it can be very risky. If you're writing software or you're building hardware where it will be very possible that what you're doing is very state-of-the-art, I don't think you have to worry a lot. Now, I want to be sure that I modified it by saying I have chosen to have liability insurance. I've never had to use it. I paid a premium. I have it. I feel good about it. But I've never had a situation where anybody ever said, where's your insurance? We need to file a claim. Nothing has ever happened. Yes, I've had some circuits that didn't work right. I've had some software programs that didn't quite work the way they're supposed to. But those things were corrected, and I've never had that problem. My recommendation is get the insurance, but go after it. It doesn't cost that much, and that opens the door to a lot of consulting business. Do you think that E&O insurance, the errors and omissions necessary? And the answer is, I think it is. I do it. I've never used it. I carry it along. I never had to apply for anything with it. I think it's a good idea. It answers the same questions as liability insurance. What other question do I have here? E&O and liability. Therefore, it's E&O. If you go through the IEEE program, on the IEEE website, you'll find that errors and omissions and liability are both presented on the website, that you can do whichever you choose or both, or you can combine them. What else do you have here? How much insurance? I'm going to pick a number out of the air and say I'm comfortable with $1 million. I know friends of mine who have more. I know some have none. And the IEEE is very well priced and very reputable. I highly recommend it, and you'll find it also on the IEEE website. Look for benefits. There's an area called FAP, which stands for Financial Advantage Program, FAP. And there's a lady administering that program called Lynn Coblin. You can talk to Lynn Coblin at any time. Tell her Gary sent you. It won't save you any money, but it'll give you good treatment. All right? How do you handle tax concepts working in various states? You have to take each state on an individual basis. I have had years where I worked in several states. At the end of the year, I have to file income tax in each one of those states. Some states are reciprocating. For instance, if you live in the state of Illinois and you work in Iowa, then your Iowa income is automatically transferred to Illinois, and you only have to file one income tax return. But I've had years where I work in Illinois and Missouri, both. St. Louis, Missouri. I have to pay taxes in Illinois on what I earn in Illinois, and pay taxes in Missouri on what I earn in Missouri. Each state reciprocates with some of their neighbors, so each one is an individual situation. Okay, what else have we got here? I have a very good contact. I have, to use, or should I get a text? A lawyer's help. Oh, I have a very good contract that I have used for an hourly rate, but does not lend itself to my or per diem. Do you recommend a particular sample? Ultimately, if you want to pay the money, you can go to a lawyer to get to be sure you're in solid ground. I got to tell you this though, but I have found that the one that's available on the IEEE website, for which IEEE USA is not responsible, they let us put it up because a group of us got together and used something that we have been successful with, and we're sharing it with the rest of the world. It's free. You go to IEEE USA, look for consultant services. You'll find a sample contract. You're welcome to use it, and but we must make the disclaimer that nobody's liable for what's on it, but it seems to work quite well. Will the site be available for download? I think so. You may have to contact Daryl Griffin or Helen Hall, and they will give the answers to that. I believe the answer is yes. You mentioned Part 4. When and where can we see that? Well, that's a good question. We just did Part 1 today. If the response we get to today's seminar is very encouraging, we will go on to do a Part 2 and or a Part 3 and or a Part 4. We'll find some speakers. Besides myself, there's some very competent people who are consulting that are part of the AICN who will be happy to do this type of a seminar. So we'll just wait to see the response we get to today's seminar. My E&O insurance is risk-based software. I lost this question. Software is a writer with an IAB. Yes. That's a statement. Yes. E&O insurance is risk-based. Very good. I think that's a good point. How was the seminar promoted? I believe the IEEE USA put out in their on their website in various places. It's under IEEE USA News and Business, Careers. Was published in a newsletter that goes out to the consultants networks, and we're also looking for ways to expand upon that too. Are you a sole proprietor since not incorporated? The answer is yes. I choose to be a sole proprietor instead of being incorporated. Very comfortable with that. Not saying it's the best way to do it. Okay. Do you have a state business license? Okay. In some cities, depending on where you live, you may have to call the city hall or whatever and ask them, I find in most cities you do not need to have a license or a business license. Some places do. I happen to live in a community where they do not ask for that, but I know some of my friends who do. And so they apply for a business license, and that's very easy to get. What else? Let's see. Have I covered a pretty good cross-section of questions? I just don't want to run too much over time here, but I have to answer questions. I'm trying to pick them up in the chat room, and I'm getting a few of them, but not all of them. By the way, feel free, excuse me, if after the seminar, if you didn't get your question answered, send me an email, and I'll try to answer your question for you. You can reach me through, you know my name, Gary, middle initial L, last name blank, G.L.blank, B-L-A-N-K, at IEEE.org. That's the finest way to me. And it's an easy name to remember. If your mind goes blank, you'll have the right name. Okay, what else do we have here? Any suggestion of getting on approved vendors list? Oh, good question. Is there any suggestion of getting on approved vendors list? That is a major project. The answer is not something I can cover in one time. It's taken me sometimes weeks and months of paperwork and negotiating to get onto a vendor's list. It depends on the company. I've had companies I've consulted with for years, and then they change management, and new management requires a different procedure. And the new procedure, although I've been experienced, I know all the people there, it took me months to get back on the vendor's list with the same company. So it's just something we have to live with. Wish I had a suggestion for getting an easy way of doing it, but I don't. My liability insurance specific to my business, as in what is my... the liability insurance that you would get would cover you for a broad range of things. Like, for instance, I say I'm electrical electronic engineering, and most of what I do would fall within that category, and so I don't have to be more specific than that. The question may ask you for give typical examples of what you work on, and I would say things like, circuit analysis or circuit design, and that's usually good enough for those purposes. Okay, we're getting some encouragement to do more sessions. We certainly would like to do that. Love to get your feedback. And unless there's something else really happening right now, let's see. Can I take one more question before we go on? Okay, somebody asked, will this or future seminars be available for professional development units or CPUs? The answer is yes. As a matter of fact, when I normally do this seminar for, say, a consultants network or for a group of consultants, like on an all-day Saturday, they can usually earn CEUs or PDHs, and we arrange that ahead of time. So you can get, those of you who are familiar with that know that the CEUs or the PDHs are the credits you get which can be used to help you to renew your engineering license year after year. So yes, we can do that. And finally, how could I not mention this last one? I hope you're still there. The IEEE USA has pioneered putting up a database with all the consultants who want to be included in this database. You have to pay a grand total of 20 cents a day, which is about $79 a year, to get your name and your description on the IEEE USA database. The IEEE USA database, which you can find very simply, going to IEEEUSA.org, look for consultant services, and you'll find that there's a database, and we have hundreds of consulting engineers who are listed there, and they're easy to find, and I've gotten a lot of business personally out of the IEEE USA database. And you can also find, we post requirements there where companies would be looking for a certain kind of consultant. And companies learn to come there and post a wanted notice, and we're working with them in order to make this a better system. And last question is, what's the best way to get an appointment with an approved vendor? If you know somebody in a company, it helps. Anybody in a company, it usually helps to have a name of somebody in a company who can help you to set that up. Maybe one more question. Is it true that if I get liability insurance, I'd have to have it for 10 years? I don't know the answer to that if you're doing a 10-year circuit design. I sometimes have heard that if at the time of the design you had the insurance, then what happens 10 years later, you don't have to carry it for 10 years, but if you had at the time that you had the design done, that may be good enough. The answer may best be obtained from a lawyer who would have a better answer for that than I do. Okay, Well, folks, we've gone a little over time, and I appreciate your bearing with us. I've enjoyed doing this today, and so I think we'll put an end to this right now. And I thank you very much for your help. I'd like to be sure to thank Daryl Griffin of IEEE USA and Helen Hall, also of IEEE USA. They're both staff, they're employees, and they do a marvelous job to help make this possible today. So Daryl, Helen, thank you very much. And we'll see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.